welcome to the 60th episode of Everyday Eternal. With me tonight are two European Legacy All-Stars, I want to say, two people that I've spent a lot of time with playing Legacy, learning Legacy, and in the case of actually both of them, also traveling all around the world, having fun getting into Legacy in the first place. So, our first guest tonight, we got from Denmark, Mr. Marc Bahra König. Hey Marc, how's it going?
Hello, I'm good.
For those of you who don't know Marc, he, I want to say, was one of the very, very, very first Legacy or Magic streamers on Twitch around 2013. I don't know if you even started in 2012, but when I got into streaming, you were already one of the most established and accomplished names. I would assume that most of our listeners know who you are, but for those who don't, Marc is not only a successful streamer, he also made, let me check my cheat sheet. He's got 6 Legacy Challenges, top 8s, I think 3 of them in a row recently, 1 win. He also won SCG Richmond in 2014, which I was present for, which was like a really, really cool thing that happened. And he's all around just known as, can I call you like a Legacy juggernaut? I'm just gonna go with that. Our second guest tonight from Germany, MariusOfTheMoon Hausmann. Marius is one of the Legacy players or Magic players I've known for the longest of times. When I got into Legacy in 2005, 2006 actually, he was already there in Munich and bossing the metagame. He was pretty much the end boss of our local metagame. And from his accomplishment lists, we know that he made 4 MKM top 8s, including 1 win. He was also the German Legacy Champion 2011, and he's got various top 8s Legacy tournaments all around Europe, like Ovino Geddon and a couple more, as well as in Magic Online, actually. So, Marius, how's it going?
Hi, Julian. Yeah, quite well.
Oh, great. Great to have you guys on. Tonight we don't have Bob or Eric, who are pretty busy, and especially with regards to Eric, now that he's gotten into full-time streaming, it's actually kind of hard to schedule sessions with him. So from what I understand, we will still have Eric on every once in a while, but this is something that's probably going to be some special feature going forward. But yeah, for tonight, what we want to talk about, basically, both of you guys are known for your signature deck, which is Death and Taxes, even though I know that one of you doesn't really see it like that anymore. But that's basically why you are on. The community has been pretty torn on their opinion of Death and Taxes, so we want to discuss that. But before we get into that, Marc, you actually went into a different format and did pretty well with it. So what happened?
I played the Vintage Challenge this weekend, and I made 2nd place.
What did you play?
I played Dredge.
You say that like, of course I played Dredge.
Yeah.
Is the deck good?
The deck is really good. It's pretty much broken in Vintage right now. The power level of Dredge just surged and went through the roof recently with Modern Horizons.
Which cards exactly made the big difference?
Force of Negation, a little bit, I would say. Like, it's not completely necessary, but Force of Vigor really was a big, big player. Hogak also impact, but Force of Vigor let the deck go manaless, which was a really big deal because it allowed the deck to get filled up with counter spells and answers to hate, while still playing the powerful Dredge engine.
Yeah, you called it tier 0 to me, or even tier -1, and a couple other people I talked to, they feel the same about the deck, so... Is this the new meta going forward? Like, what are actually the bad matchups left for you? And I'm also asking because we got the MKM Frankfurt tournament coming up next month, and Tom de Decker from Belgium offered me to basically be able to borrow a couple of cards or the entire Power 9 from him, so I can actually play Vintage there. But yeah, from everything you told me, it's gonna be a slaughterfest. It's gonna be like Dredge all over the place. I don't know. What should I be playing if I want to beat Dredge?
I don't know. How do you beat this deck? It has like 12 counter spells and a turn 2, turn 3 kill.
So I was hoping you would tell me I would play TPS, the Perfect Storm, and just win on the first turn. But if it plays 12 counter spells, that would be like Force of Will, Mental Misstep, Mindbreak Trap, or Force of Negation.
Yeah, or Force of Negation. Like sometimes they play. You can even play 4 Mindbreak Trap, 4 Force of Will, 4 Missteps, and some Force of Negation. I played without Force of Negation and Mindbreak Trap because I was trying to beat the mirror, basically. And I lost to Storm in the finals, but it was It was pretty unlikely, I would say. He was in really tough positions both games and managed to still win. But I think it's a really, really hard matchup still for DPS.
Wow. And do you not even mind, for example, being on the draw against Workshops? I guess the first game against Workshops is already pretty good, and then you just gotta win one of the post-block games.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really, really good matchup. I played against several mod decks on the way to the top 8, and it was just, they had to have so many hate pieces, and then they had to lock me behind a sphere, and even I beat a sphere because I played 3 mana-producing lands in the list, and it's just impossible for them to win 2 out of 3 games.
And you still get to dig for your mana-producing lands using Workshop, right? Yeah, that would be broken. Using Bazaar.
Yeah, exactly.
So going forward, is this the end game for Vintage, or is there anything you see happening in the future? Like maybe even what do you even restrict? Right, you can't really restrict Bazaar.
I don't know exactly. Some people said that you should restrict Hollow One, and I don't think that's impactful enough. That's a 4 of sideboard card, and it helps beat some hate sometimes, but it's not a big deal. Like, if you really wanna nerf Dredge, you should restrict Force of Vigor, because it just because it doesn't have to play Nature's Claim or anything like that, like Wismare or what's the destroy artifact called? Ingoture.
Gussblockzerkauer in German.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
You don't need to play Mana Confluence or Gemstone, whatever lands. You just play 4 Bazaars, and then maybe I played 2 Petrified Fields and 1 Strip Mine for the mirror, basically. The Strip Mine was for the mirror, and the Petrified Field was just versus Wasteland decks. And yeah, it was only the mirror that I was worried about. I played 4 Leyline of the Void main deck, and even people are starting to put Force of Vigor in the main deck because they're trying to beat main deck Leylines.
Okay, that sounds really wild.
That's where we are in the meta right now. We're just trying to beat the next level.
So maybe it's time for some fish deck to come in that play Cavern of Souls and Scavenging Ooze. maybe Elves playing Scavenging Ooze, producing a ton of mana. Maybe that's the next step.
I don't think that's nearly fast enough, and it also doesn't really beat Force of Will or Misstep. So, the best deck right now to beat it's some deck that plays 4 Containment Priest and probably Leylines as well.
Oh, that's a good one, right? Containment Priest is actually pretty hard for you to answer, I would think. You've got Force of Will and that's it?
No, I also have Contamination in the sideboard.
Oh, okay. And you can also sometimes just hollow bond them, right?
Exactly. And there was one game where my opponent went turn 1 Deathrite Shaman and Yixit Jailer. And then I just Contamination. Oh, he played Hollow One as well.
You mean Contagion, or?
Contagion, yeah.
Yeah, Contagion.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
Contamination is, I guess, a silly black enchantment, if I'm right.
No, it's a pitch black card.
That's Contagion. That's Contagion. Contamination is the Ursa Saga one that makes all lands produce black mana, but you have to sacrifice a creature in the upkeep.
The Black Moon.
The Black Moon. But yeah, I would assume you played Contagion.
Yeah, I played Contagion. Did I say Contamination?
Maybe we just misunderstood you. But I think it's pretty clear.
Anyway, yeah. So you can play Contagion, or you can play Spinning Darkness, or you can play Sickening Shoal. Yeah. So you can play these cards to beat the creature hate. So you can still beat it, but Containment Priest is definitely the best hate piece.
Shoutouts to Spinning Darkness, a card that hasn't worked on Magic Online for, I think, almost a decade. I think they might have fixed it recently, but that card was broken and didn't really work for a long, long time. Marc, didn't you just recently rediscover some new bug on Magic Online? And speaking of that?
Yes, I just an hour ago discovered that timely reinforcements makes 3 soldier tokens even when you don't have any creatures, when the opponent has no creatures. So my opponent just tapped out versus me on turn 3 and cast that, and I was very surprised, so I just let it resolve, and then he just get 3 soldiers, and I was just sitting with 3 lands, and we were playing a control mirror, so 3 1/1s on turn 3 is pretty powerful.
Who would have thought? Legacy, one of the most powerful formats, 3 mana, 3 1/1s.
No, sorry, it was Modern.
Oh, it was Modern? Okay, yeah, I can see it being better in Modern then.
Yeah. So Yeah, so I just conceded the match and reported him.
That sounds like you. No, seriously. If you think they did it on purpose, then you definitely should do that.
Yeah,
and you will also be reimbursed, right?
I guess I will. Hopefully.
Yeah. And speaking of vintage, what a lot of people these days actually don't know is that Marius was also super successful in vintage. I remember you pretty much winning everything in at least Germany for quite a while.
Yeah, that was some time ago when I played Workshop, but then I sold my Moxes, the Lotus, and the Workshops for $3,000 altogether. Nowadays, I would get more for just the Lotus. Was just a bad timing to sell it.
Well,
but, was still okay because I got the stuff for far less money than I sold it.
Didn't you get half your power from like judging our local tournaments? That was
correctly, in Munich in the Sabelschule. It was quite funny. But these were times when you really got good stuff from tournaments and where plateau were the crap cards you could win.
Yeah, I remember when I got like 3rd place or something and I didn't pick the plateau, I picked the curse scroll and the plateau went down to like 6th or 7th place and they tried to sell it but nobody wanted it. But I mean, it's still the same, right? Who plays plateau? Is plateau the least played dual land in Legacy right now?
Ooh, since Badland is in this awful Black-Red Reanimate deck, I would assume this. Yeah,
I mean,
no, but concerning vintage, I always looked at the top 8 lists after I sold my Mud, and I always thought, oh, now they restricted Lodestone Golem and they restricted Chalice, and the deck must finally be dead. And it became even more popular over the years, and more and more and more popular. And you played it once, and you told me it's just complete silly.
Yeah, I played it at MKM Hamburg 2017. I actually hadn't played Vintage in a while, and I instantly won the tournament, which of course like came with a lot of luck. But at that point, the deck felt absolutely stupid. And afterwards, I played Paradoxical Outcome, and that deck felt stupid. And now Marc tells me that Dredges is the next big thing. Where I have a certain almost morbid curiosity and fascination with Vintage because even though a lot of broken stuff is going on, sometimes you see, I mean, I remember a time where Sage of Epetier was like a card that you wouldn't get laughed at if you played that because you played, basically the decks were just looking for a 1-drop that you can then use to, what's the Ninja of the Deep Hours on turn 2. So sometimes like the weirdest cards show up in Vintage. But yeah, it looks like Vintage is slowly has backed itself into a corner where, I don't know, the elephant is the room with restrictions of Bazaar and Workshop. And I think Iron Foresight almost mentioned that. I think he actually made a literal tweet where he said that cards like Workshop or Brainstorms are pillars of the formats in their respective formats, and they will never be restricted or banned. So I'm actually really curious what's in store for Vintage next, because Dredge is a very, very special strategy that you would think you could hate out pretty effectively. But with it having this Swiss Army knife in the main deck. That's true, but I mean, it's their Vintage, right? It should be able to fight back against the most broken stuff, but maybe actually I should play Dredge. I'm gonna hit up Tom and let him know, and maybe he's got some Bazaars. You're gonna play Modern, right, in Frankfurt?
Yes, I'm going to, and I'm really looking forward to it because I just bought the rest for my Esper Shadow, going away from Grixis. But I'm happy that I don't need these rest in peace inside bot anymore.
So people are still working on the Hogak deck. I'm in some kind of Hogak chat, and I thought it would be over, but I just took a look at earlier today, and people are already brewing hard. But obviously with the combo kill gun, it's a lot easier to hate out because suddenly you're really only losing to beatdown. And like if you're losing to beatdown, that's something you can fight over. But I'm curious what's going to happen.
I just talked to some friends who are too brewing around with Hogak, and I guess I'm going to still let the 2 Surgicals in main because it can handle Phoenix too, and let's be honest, the most stupid card in Modern at the moment for years, in my opinion, is Faithless Looting. It enables only stupid decks that are not really interactive and don't bring much fun to any of the players.
Yeah, it's interesting that Wizards, when they were discussing the different cards they could ban in Modern because of the dominance of Hogak, they didn't even mention faithless looting. And that also leads me to believe maybe it's got this holy cow status because it's considered a pillar of the modern format. I wouldn't bet a lot of money on faithless looting ever really being banned in modern.
Yeah, maybe you're right there.
Mark, have you played a lot of modern recently?
I've sniffed to the format a few times, but I just burn my fingers and then I go to Legacy again.
That's great. So overall, how do you feel about Legacy? You've been really successful online as of late. I mean, you've always been one of the more successful grinders, but as of late, I think you showed up in almost every Legacy challenge that has been played and playing different decks every single time.
I think Legacy is pretty good right now. I have been saying that I thought Legacy was the best it has been in years before War of the Spark was printed, but still after it's pretty interesting, and Modern Horizons brought some good things, I think. Although Ran 6 is maybe a little bit too powerful, it's still an interesting card, I think.
It's for sure a bit too good in my opinion too. It's a walking crucible that pings damage.
It's the card that pretty much defines the format right now. And just to give you guys my impression of the format, I feel that all these greed... I mean, Mark, you also saw those lists, right? Those 4-color lists that even play Wasteland and Basic Lands. And they somehow seem to work out for people. Like, they even got Anorak to stop playing Miracles. And now he plays like 4-color Miracles with Astrolabe and everything, just so they can utilize... Red and 6, which is in a pretty weird color combination for control decks. Red and green is not really something you primarily play, and if you're playing a 2-mana Planeswalker, you definitely want to be able to play it like pretty early on. So it leads to these weird builds that heavily dominate all the grind fights that you really can only try to attack maybe on their mana, but even they are using basic lands and have Red and 6 to fix their mana, so that's a hard thing to do. On the other hand, we've seen a big resurgence of Rug Delver or Canadian Threshold also utilizing Red and 6. We talked about that in the last episode of Everyday Eternal, how it actually fixes a lot of problems that Rug Delver used to have. Primarily, for example, stuff like Baleful Strix, which puts a hard block to pretty much all their creatures. So I'm actually kind of happy about that because I always kind of like those matches against Rug Delver. It feels much more... sophisticated than just straight up blue-red Delver. So I kind of like that. But a different trend that started, I want to say like 1 or 2 weeks ago, is that people are playing a lot of crazy fast combo decks, me included, I gotta admit, just for the sake of trying it. And the reasoning, at least for me, is that while people are busy doing all this mid-range stuff, like this heavy late-game mid-range control stuff, whatever you want to call it, I really just want to be the guy who activates Goblin Charbage on the first turn, and they didn't have their Force of Will, and they will suffer for it. And it's worked quite well. I played Belcher. Belcher was okay, but then Eric told me to maybe try out Upsal Spells, and he's been pretty successful with it. I think Stefan Schütz also got like a 5-0 or 2 on Magic Online with it. And Upsal Spells is really good. It's actually really good right now. I win so many games where I don't even know what my opponent is playing, just because they are playing one of these mid-range greed piles and they didn't keep a Force of Will. Sometimes you can even easily beat the Force of Will. So this is the metagame that I'm seeing right now. That makes it a little bit harder for like those synergistic creature decks like Death and Taxes, like Elves, to a certain degree even Maverick, even though Maverick also benefits from it because they actually get to play Plague Engineer, which is another big piece to the puzzle that is Legacy right now. A card that's seeing even main deck play in a lot of those mid-range decks just because it's so good against most of the field that isn't combo. And even if it's combo, I guess you can also like take down some Goblin tokens. So yeah, that's my impression of the format. And I think that's not going to be stable in the long run. I think the fast combo decks are going to go down again and going to go away as people drop off a little bit of their hunger for endgame, mid-range good stuff and start adding a little bit more discards, a little bit more dedicated hate cards. So that's where I hope we're moving forward to. But how do you guys feel about the format right now with regards to which decks are viable?
Well, I think, first of all, you are of course right. I think fast combo is a good opportunity now to play and not in 1 year. The question is how much fun you have playing Oops All Spells or Belcher. I see always your stream and you play Elves and it's so much fun and people in chat are cheering at you and Oops All Spells, okay, I kill you, and now I kill you not, and next game I kill you again. And then after an hour, the league is by, no matter what the result is, but I wouldn't have fun with this. Yes, I like First One Blood Moon too, but that's a different story. And concerning the Ren and 6 list, I think there are many directions in which you can go. So first of all, the Canadian really profits from this, and I always liked Canadian very much, but it just felt inferior to Grixis Delver. Not only to Grixis Delver when Deathrite was legal, but to Grixis Delver 2 in modern days, where you just played Thought Size and Gurmag Angler as hard threats that Canadian did not have. But with Ren and 6, this deck got 2-mana Crucible that pings Baleful Strix, that pings other little creatures, and that even grows your Tarmogoyf if it dies. What's not bad at all. My favorite build with Ren and 6, to be honest, is this Ruck mid-range list with Shardless Agent that goes for these Rhinos, for Vision and Rhinos. And Arcanist. Just play the Arcanist, cascade into Rhinos or Ancestral Vision, and even if the opponent counters it, you attack with Arcanist and get your Rhinos then, or your Vision. And Ren and 6 fits perfectly into this build.
Yeah, that deck is super sexy. I think it's called Rock Waterfalls, going back to the idea of cascading into a ton of stuff. That's really good. Marc, how do you like that deck? Have you tried it out? You've been streaming a bit more lately. I think you took a break for a while, but I think you're back to it, right?
I'm not really back to it right now, as I just moved and need to get a stable, high quality internet connection again. But once I have that, I'm probably returning again. I can't say for sure, but about the Rock deck, I'm really not a fan of that deck. I'm very competitive, and I've played a lot of really bad decks. That's true, but I think that deck is also just bad. I think the deck is a dead end, and it has so many problems that it cannot really fix. It also plays a game where you're trying to outvalue the opponent, but you still lose to some of the faster decks late game. And that's like the fundamental problem with that deck. Like, even if you make, 4 Rhinos on turn 3 or turn 2 or whatever, and then you make another 4, you're still gonna lose to all the combo decks, and you're even gonna lose to Batterskull still.
So you're saying you're producing card advantage with the deck, but the card advantage consists mainly of being able to put fat stuff into play and have a couple of creatures, but not really having anything strategically that offers you a different way to play the game other than playing back creatures and attacking, which makes it problematic in the long run.
Your grind is just too low impact. You're doing a lot of things that are good on turn 5 to 6, but a lot of decks do more powerful stuff once the turns becomes a little bit, once the game progresses a little bit more.
That's interesting. That I haven't actually played the deck. I've only watched it, and I found it interesting. That reminds me of something that I always feel, how a legacy deck should be able to do something really unfair. Either you have insane acceleration and stay ahead of the opponent that way, but then you gotta close the game, or you're able to do something really unfair. And the way you describe it makes me feel like the deck is not really capable of doing super unfair stuff. It's the kind of deck that you want to play against. Well, okay, you even mentioned how Stoneblade with Batterskull can be a problem, but against something that's also not very unfair, that's basically you're a really good sealed deck that has tons of card advantage and ways to do that. That's the vibe that I'm getting from it.
The problem is it doesn't have answers for the really powerful grind cards like Batterskull and other equipment. It doesn't have enough answers to that, so it just gets outgrind in the super late game, and in the early game it also just loses to Wasteland or Thalia or what have you.
So even if you get to attack with your Dreadhorde Arcanist in the late game, you're flashing back cantrips, and those cantrips draw you into more basically 1/3 Dreadhorde Arcanists, or maybe some Rhinos that won't actually change the pattern of the board. That's actually interesting. That's something people should be working on, that also needs addressing through the sideboard, but it can actually lead to a lot of frustration.
But this is stuff you can adjust, Julian. You can, for example, play this new green-red enchantment that deals 1 damage to each spell an opponent plays, and can destroy an artifact or enchantment if you sack it, and 2 of them stops combo. So maybe just play 2 of them in the main and 2 in the sideboard. Do you have the name of the card? I just don't know it.
Cinderwine, right?
Cinderwines, yes, exactly. You can play Cinderwines, you can play Pact of Negation for fast combo, you can adjust the deck, and perhaps...
Pact of Negation?
Force of Negation.
Okay, that would be wild. You can flash that back with Dreadhorde Arcanist, I guess.
Yeah. Perhaps the best deck list has just not been found, but you can adjust the deck. I agree with Marc that you are lacking discard. That may be really hurt. But you have options. You have options to play main or sideboard.
So yeah, maybe we're going to see more of that deck in the future once people address these kind of issues. I would certainly love to see that, because to me as well, the rock color combination has always been very close to my heart. I'm happy when I see that deck doing well. So yeah, and speaking of color combinations, I've got, it's actually pretty straightforward with regards to colors. I got Marc, how do you call that? Your Chakmoth control deck that you top, I think, 4'd the challenge in the beginning of June with, right in front of me. The signature card, of course, Chakmoth Thrawn Physician. What actually made you play that card? Because I think when it was spoiled, people were like, okay, cool, it's Chakmoth, but I'm probably not going to play him. But you seem to be pretty high on it, and you also did pretty well with it.
Yeah. I call the deck Yogg Fit. I just call it Yawgmoth Fit on Magic Online, but people were shortening it to Yogg Fit, and I think that's a fine name. So that's what I call it now. And what I saw in Yawgmoth, the card, was that it was a really powerful card draw spell or card draw creature with recurring removal. In Nickfit, you already want to sacrifice a lot of creatures, and even the ones that you don't really want to sacrifice, you don't mind if you draw a card at the same time and maybe kill a creature. So what I saw in this build, compared to regular like junk Nickfit, was that it was a board control engine. So basically, you play a creature, and that's great. And you like to have creatures in Nickfit; they kill your opponent. But instead of trying to control the early mid game in Nickfit with Pernicious Deed and Abrupt Decays and Assassin's Trophies, and then trying to draw your finishers or more answers like on the right times in the right order and stuff, instead of that, you just have the a draw engine built into this creature that at the same time removes your opponent's board. So I decided to add some Cavern of Souls and a lot more creatures that I could sack, and the deck did pretty well. So that's what I'm working on now in terms of Nickfit.
Yeah, I think that the draw engine that is Chakmoth might actually be a little bit underappreciated, because when I saw it, I was like, okay, you get to put a counter, but you also have to sacrifice a creature. But when you have, you're running one of Lynching Souls, but you also have a lot of other cards that you don't mind sacrificing. You're playing 4 Veteran Explorers, you play 2 Stoneforge Mystic, which can also be sacrificed later on if need be. Ors of Pontiff makes sense. Actually, and you also have some synergy with Marine of Clan Nel-Tooth, because I was just going to ask you, with all that stuff that's going on, wouldn't you want to play old school Genesis in the deck? But I guess Marine of Clan Nel-Tooth is actually pretty much that, right? She brings back creatures either into play or onto your hand to reuse with Chakma. That's actually a really powerful engine once you get it going. Does that come up often?
Yeah, a lot of the games that you win is when you get the combo of a creature and Yawgmoth and Meren. And you have the Cavern of Souls to resolve the Yawgmoth, you have the Green Santine to find Meren. It comes up often enough, and but usually when that combo happens, you don't play the game for very long, because there's basically no decks, no fair decks at least, that can handle that amount of card advantage.
Yeah, that looks pretty strong. Are you still playing that deck, or is it just something you tried and now you're moving on?
I've kind of moved on, but I will return to that deck for sure. And I right when Blue-Red Delver came out, it was really, really strong. Like when they started playing Dreadhorde Arcanist, I could just use Yawgmoth to put a -1 counter on Dreadhorde Arcanist, then that was nothing, and I drew a card and killed Delvers, etc. And I feel like we're really under appreciating Orzhov Pontiff here, because Orzhov Pontiff is fantastic with Yawgmoth. You can often do a one-sided massacre while drawing 2 cards, and you can, you have the Cavern of Souls to make sure to resolve your Orzhov Pontiff. And the most problematic permanent usually for Nick Fit is True Name Nemesis, which it is a very clean answer to. And yeah, it just provides so much value in the deck. I almost want to play 3, but it's hard to fit them.
So would you say this is like a really strong deck against all those mid-game, end-game decks? How does it line up against something that's trying to abuse Wrenn and 6?
Well, I haven't played it that much since people really discovered Wrenn and 6, but it's a deck that's not trying to attack your mana, and it has a relatively stable mana base. So I would think that it's probably pretty solid. The engine of Yawgmoth is much more powerful once it's online than a Wrenn and 6, because Wrenn and 6 draws only lands and Yawgmoth draws answers and is an answer in itself. So I think it matches up pretty well, but it's something I'm gonna have to play in the near future again.
So which decks are you trying to avoid playing this deck?
It matches up well against a lot of things, honestly, but I don't want to play versus decks with lots of basics and strong late game. Like, Death and Tax is okay, but actually I'm not even sure, because Yawgmoth is so good against Death and Taxes, and it's also really good against elves and stuff. So
yeah, I can imagine once it comes online, it's a real nightmare. I've seen it played out of humans against me, and once humans had enough time to get Yawgmoth online, I really had issues with elves, like big time issues. I'm wondering, you probably, like I would guess, don't want to play against the crazy fast combo decks because you don't have many ways to interact. I guess you have 3 surgicals that I'm seeing in the list right now. I could see something like show and tell based being an issue. Maybe those. You have 4 cable therapies, and then some hate bears. It's certainly not hopeless, right?
It's not the best, probably, but it's very winnable. And Surgical and this card is so good against show and tell decks. In that challenge, I beat JPA in the first round, and he's like the number 1 show and tell player. I actually played him the very first round and won that. And I traditionally, I've actually been winning a lot of show and tell matchups with Nick Fit. Like, in the first challenge that I top 8 was with Nick Fit, and I won in the finals versus show and tell as well. Sneak and tell.
Awesome. Marius, do you think this could be a deck for our friend Mr. Shu, who's looking for a deck like this right now? Do you think you could actually get him hooked on that?
Oh, I honestly don't know, because he's quite stuck on Brainstorm and playing Buck in colors. He just does not like the classic Nick Fit Rock color combination.
He strikes me as the stereotypical Nick Fit player. I don't know why.
Shu?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know him primarily as Infect player, and he played Infect very well. But Infect is probably the deck that lost most with the newest expansion.
Yeah,
Wrenn and 6, Plague Engineer, and all the stuff which has come previous, Fatal Push and so on, makes really a hard time for Nick Fit. For Infect, sorry.
So maybe there's a different deck that we can actually get you hooked on, Marius, because I feel like you're wondering what to play in Legacy. At least I get many messages every week from you. Maybe I should play this, maybe I should play that. And maybe Marc has the answer for you in the very next Legacy challenge that he ended up top 8ing. A deck that I actually ended up calling Obelisk Spider Control, which is not the correct name, I was told later on. But at least that's what I'm going to introduce it at. You can find the link to it in the show notes. It's also a Green Sun Sonnet-based deck. It's basically 4 colors, so every color except blue, but it's only splashing white for Knight of the Reliquary, and red for Huntmaster of the Files, and of course for Wrenn and 6. It's actually a Stompy deck. If you ask me, I would say it's a next level evolution of Sylvan Plug. But Marc, I think you introduced this deck by a different name.
I just call it 4-color Wrenn, and I think it's the next level of 4-color Loam. I think that Life from the Loam is an outdated card for that deck, for a Chalice deck, and I think Wrenn just 1-for-1, it just replaces it completely.
Yeah, totally agree here. That's what I told Alex Beiersdorfer too, and he agreed in his 4-color loam deck that he's just going to replace the loams and one another card for 3 Ren and 6, and that sounds completely reasonable.
Yes, and I think you should play 4 Ren and 6 before you even put the first Life from the Loam in.
Yeah, totally agree.
So I think I've seen people calling it Sylvan Plug splashing red, but I don't think it's actually a true Sylvan Plug deck. The only thing that's really Sylvan Plug about this deck right now is Green Sun Zenith and Trinisphere, I guess. I mean, that's a lot of decks play those cards. So, but the Sylvan Plug thing is that you play Trinisphere and Green Sun Zenith together, maybe. But that's not how I remember Sylvan Plug. Sylvan Plug was just a green deck splashing black, and it was because the meta was completely blue some years ago. It was playing 4 main deck Choke, and it was playing up to 4 Rolling Spoil, and then it was playing Silver Library and Obstinate Bailiff, that on quote-unquote combo.
One of the more questionable combos of Legacy.
Yes, so you play Obstinate Bailiff, gain 4 life, and then next turn you can continue drawing extra cards with Silver Library from the life you gained. But it was not even playing Green Sun Zenith in the beginning. It was just playing Chokes and 3 Spheres, Twin Spheres, and Chalice and stuff. But the thing that stood out for me, that deck was playing Rolling Spoil. And, it was a land destruction deck that played some random big creatures.
For those of you who don't know, the way I remembered Rolling Spoil, I think is it 4 mana, destroy a land, and if you paid black, all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn?
Exactly, that's exactly the card.
Oh, wow. I actually didn't look that up, I'm smart, allegedly.
So I think the only thing that reminds us now really of Sylvan Plug is the random creatures and Trinisphere, I guess. But I think the deck is closer in concept to 4-color Loam. And so I just call it 4-color Ren. I mean, people are free to argue that, but I don't think it's the next evolution of Sylvan Plug. I think it's the next evolution of 4-color Loam.
You already mentioned that it entirely drops the Life from the Loam, which feels like an outdated card. So it's really all about, the way I see it, well, first of all, of course, the Stompy mana based, where you can sometimes steal wins with Mox Diamond, Trinispheres, and Chalices. But it also has a really, really nice selection of 10 different creatures that it plays. I'm actually going to read them from top to bottom. Dryad Arbor, Scavenging Ooze, Tarmogoyf, Cursor of Crewfix, Knight of the Reliquary, Obelisk Spider, Ramunap, Excavator, Huntmaster of the Fells, Maran of Clan Tooth, and my favorite card that I actually used for a long time as my commander, Titania, Protector of Argoth. What are you actually looking to do? Are you looking to play a really good mid-range game, or do you try to lock your opponent out, or just create a ton of card advantage? Well, I mean, of course, it depends on the matchup. But in which regards, other than Loam, is this different from 4-color Loam? I also see that it has much less removal, right?
Yes, there's much less removal and much less reliance on black, because Liana of the Veil, while it's okay, it just doesn't really work with the mana, and it's not powerful enough to try to make it work. You also play Ancient Tombs for a little faster luck pieces, but basically it's a mana denial deck that can play the value game a bit. But I think a lot of the creature package can actually, or a significant part can be cleaned up a bit. I don't think Miran is right to play in this deck. It doesn't have the sacrifice synergies, so it's not really, it's not the powerful threat that it is in Nickfit. It's not like, deal with this before my end step, or you're gonna get outvalued, you're gonna lose. It's more like, a bad Eternal Witness, basically.
Yeah, I noticed that you also don't have any 1-drops, really, that she can bring back immediately. I guess she can still bring back any creature the way I remember her working, but she can put them into the battlefield. Yeah. I mean, that's already pretty good. An interesting card that I keep referring is Obelisk Spider, which is just like, it's such a cool and awesome answer to Dreadhorde Arcanist. Is that the one reason why you put the spider in? And for those of you who don't know what the spider does, it's a colorless, a black, and a green, 1/4 reach. When Obelisk Spider deals combat damage to a creature, put a -1/-1 counter on the creature. And every time you put one of those counters on a creature, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So what you do is you block Dreadhorde Arcanist and you put the count on it, which gives it 0 power. So after the first attack, it can never, really flash back anything again. And it also actually outright kills Delver, because it deals 1 damage and puts the counter and survives in combat. So I just really like those cool synergies, even though they are probably I would like it more if it had Death Touch, so it was always useful, but it's kind of cool, I want to say.
I think Obelisk Spider it definitely belongs in the deck. I think that's one thing. Another thing is that it's a perfect example of a metagame creature. Like it's obviously not a great creature. It has terrible stats and it doesn't finish the game. And,
hey, I was just trying to talk it up.
And there's lots of downsides to this card. It's a 3 mana 1/4. That's not great, but actually the way it fits in this meta, exactly like you explained, makes it super good. It's very hard to outright kill this creature and in an effective way, especially versus a Chalice Trinisphere deck. But it slots in so perfectly in the metagame as a Green Sun Zenith target, for special scenarios that actually comes up often because the metagame is like it is. This creature fits perfectly and is actually a must-deal threat and a threat I've had to get Force of Will several times. And people spend 2 lightning bolts on it, and that's fine. I mean, that's the lowest floor basically for this card versus the matchups where it's meant for.
That reminds me of when I played that troll deck, that meme deck, which basically played 4 giant spiders. It was like a green kitchen table deck, but it played 4 giant spiders, and sometimes I played it in Legacy 2-man queues when we still had those. And I had it force-filled at times, my giant spider against Delver decks, because the Delver decks knew they would need to trade 2 for 1 against fucking giant spider. And one guy even told me, okay, I'm not gonna force-fill this spell that you're playing because I know I gotta hold my force-fill for the giant spider. And now it looks like you found an even more effective thing. But I just find it amazing. But how do you overall rate this deck? Is this something that people should definitely explore more? How do you rate it?
I think obviously it's a Chalice deck, and so it has some power already. It's the deck is put on a certain power level just from playing the fast mana Chalice combo. But other than that, I think the power level is just super high in the deck, and it will keep getting toys as long as it's 4 colors. And I think it's pretty high power, and it can be tuned to be even better than it is. And Matt Sohle, he went 12th in the Legacy playoffs with it, so I just took his deck, made a few changes, and then top 4'd the Legacy Challenge the next week. So I think the deck has potential, and it should be explored.
Mats Ola is the bane of my existence. Ever since he played the Cleric Stompy deck, I have nightmares about that guy. Marius, how do you feel about the deck? Is that something that would interest you? We haven't talked about what's your deck to go right now. Is it something like this?
I like this deck very much, at least much more than Nickfit, any version of Nickfit.
Can you hear the tone in Marius' voice? Can you say the name Nickfit again?
Nickfit.
Yeah, see, it sounds a little bit condescending. Anyway, go on.
Nickfit is the deck for me. If you have a card and do not know where to play it, you build another Nickfit build. It does not matter which color, pile, if Nickfit. Yeah, well, no, but this deck I see here, it looks like Marc has had many thoughts on it, and I really like all the cards. If I would build it, I would probably go with 1 Sylvan Library less and only 3 Trinispheres, because if you draw them, they can always be a little awkward, and probably I would put 2 more creatures in the deck. But the concept of the deck it's great. It's a mana denial deck with Chalice, with good creatures and great sideboard options. A bit regrettable that there's only place for 2 Ancient Tomb in it, because every Ancient Tomb you put more in the list gives you a much higher chance that playing a first round Chalice or even a Trinisphere together with Mox Diamond.
That's true, but Mox Diamond also kind of acts like an Ancient Tomb in this list, right? So you got like 6 ways to get those guys in the first turn.
Yeah, I watched many games of 4-color Loam. And the 4-color Loam deck always felt really, really bad if you were on the draw and did not have a Mox Diamond start. Then it felt like a very, very bad Junt deck. And with each Ancient Tomb you add, you have much more chances on playing turn 1 Chalice.
The way I see it, this deck has the option of doing something broken on the first turn, but with this amount of acceleration, including the 4 Green Sun Senate that can accelerate, it's really looking to do something broken on turn 2 and 3, while having the option of doing something broken on the first turn. But it's not as dependent on that, which I kind of like. Comparing it to 4-color Loam, I think 4-color Loam often would only play 2 Green Sun Senate. This one plays 4, which also gives it even more acceleration than that deck. Like, because you mentioned, if Loam doesn't have the Mox Start, and every time I play against a deck, I'm sitting there, I feel like, if they don't have Mox Diamond, my hand is great against them. And if they have Mox Diamond, I'm really far behind. And I mean, it goes both ways, right? They feel like if they don't have the Mox, they also feel far behind. So I like how this is a more balanced approach to Loam, while also still managing to play a lot of really powerful spells. And of course, utilizing not only the trend of the month, the new flavor of the month, Ren 6, but probably a card that's here to stay. It's really expensive right now, isn't it?
Yeah, $300 for Ren 6 in foil, and $60 for a normal one. And I just have the list here before me on my computer, and online it's about $60 too. That's for MTG Online quite much.
It's actually more.
It's much more, actually. Yeah, it's over 100 tickets by now.
You cannot really get them, and if you get them, they're over 100 tickets.
You know what they should do? They should put them in treasure chests.
They will, and once they do that, they will drop to, 7 tickets within a few weeks.
7 tickets? That sounds crazy.
Something like that.
But if you take a final look at deck, what I see, really many new cards. It was rare in Legacy that a new expansion came out, a new set came out, and so many cards found their way into a Legacy deck. Obviously, Obelisk Spider is there. It's quite new.
MVP.
But 4 Ren of 6 in the main deck. Even Land Nurturing Peatland. It's this black-green Horizon Canopy. Fits as one of. And if you look at the sideboard, one Collector Oath, the Walking Nylrod which is great with Green Sun Senate. 2 Plague Engineer, that are really many cards for a Legacy deck with a new set.
Yeah, Plague Engineer is a big one. And the Plague Engineer is also the card that brings us into the next part of the podcast, which is actually the main reason that I wanted both of you guys on, because both of you guys are really, really accomplished Death and Taxes pilots, have spent a lot of time developing that deck, both with regards to the regular deck as well as Splash Colors. And both of you feel very different about the viability of Death and Taxes right now, because obviously there's challenges that the deck faces, I want to say right now. So before we get too deep into the current state, Marc, can you give us just a general rundown of the mindset that would make somebody play Death and Taxes, even if they are not Danish? You know, if you're playing one of the most powerful formats ever created, and people put Grizzlebrand into play on the first turn. So why do you want to be the guy who untaps and casts Mother of Runes?
That's a question of how I want to play Magic as well, and not just about the power level of decks and why I play Legacy. And to make it as concise as I can, I think that Grizzlebrand decks are way too one-dimensional and uninteresting. That is for me personally. I enjoy variety and interaction in games, and if most games are unique, that would also just be great. So I find that Death and Taxes satisfies those criteria quite a bit. That's how I like to play Magic. I also just think that the deck is so good now, it keeps getting toys, and I don't see why I wouldn't play this deck. It feels great to me, and I'm having fun.
To break it down, and I can totally relate to that, and I think Marius can as well, the kind of Magic that Death and Taxes plays and represents is probably some of the best Magic and most enjoyable Magic, at least to us, and I think a lot of other people in the format as well. I actually, little known fact, before I bought Elves in 2013, I narrowed it down to either buying Elves or Death and Taxes, because I really like the playstyle of both, and I got really close to buying Death and Taxes as well. And I can totally see where you're coming from, even though people, they will go ahead and tell you, but Marc, what if they throw 20 Goblin tokens on you in the first turn? Then you're like, okay, maybe I lose, but I think that you can still overall grind out a lot of wins and do well in the meta game, because the deck, and here comes the thing I don't really like referencing at all, because the deck has a lot of skill to it. I think Death and Taxes is one of the decks where you can really, really tell the difference between a first-time player and somebody who really knows all the in and outs of the deck. Before we get back to that, one thing that you once did to me on Magic Online that blew my mind is, you didn't have Vial, but you had Flicker Wisp in play. So you played a main phase Flicker Wisp, flickered out your own Flicker Wisp, That came in at your end step. That took out my Cradle. And then I didn't have Cradle for a turn. I was stunned. I was like, how can somebody do this? And those are the things that, I mean, they might sound cute, but there's tons of these little things in Death and Taxes. So I can totally understand your fascination with the deck, even though there's problematic things going on in the metagame right now. Wouldn't you say that there's, especially with Renin 6 and Plague Engineer, we have seen people abandoning the deck almost, like Marius, who's probably outside of Denmark one of the most accomplished Death and Taxes pilots in Europe, has stopped playing it. Phil Gallagher also isn't too high on it, the guy who runs Thrain University. And even Cyrus Cormangill, a new arrival to the Death and Taxes community, I want to say, already left the deck behind again. He had some harsh words for the deck that I'm not going to repeat here, but after leaving Storm, he felt he wanted to do something new, and he also left the deck behind. So the deck faces issues, but Marc, you feel that it's capable of not only surviving, but actually putting out numbers like you do, and you think that's not just a one-time thing that's going on?
Yeah, so some of the new cards are problematic. The War of the Sparks cards came, and they were very impactful, and they were played a lot. But actually, they all lined up pretty poorly against Death and Taxes, since they were killable by, creatures. You could attack them, and they would die. But Modern Horizons brought two cards that are very good in a vacuum against Death and Taxes, and that's of course Renin 6 and Plague Engineer. But the decks that play Renin 6, they are super greedy usually, and if they aren't that greedy, then they are just decks that Death and Taxes was traditionally very, very good against. So it didn't flip the matchup that much, but it did make the meta much more fair, which I think is a big bonus for Death and Taxes. The real problem from Modern Horizons is Plague Engineer, and if it comes out of the sideboard, I'm not too worried. But once people play multiple copies main deck, that's when I start to worry. And I've also beaten multiple main deck Plague Engineers, but I've also lost to it. And actually, the challenge this Sunday, I was knocked out by someone playing multiple main deck Plague Engineers. I still got to 3 games, and it was close, but it was not meant to be. Once you start to main deck those cards, that's when it gets difficult.
And Marius, how do you feel? Because you also, I think this is one of the decks you've played the longest in, well, I think by now it's almost 15 years of Legacy, right?
Let me think. 2005 was the year where I played much land still at these great Nuremberg tournaments. Yeah, 15 years, yes.
And I've known you for many decks, but Death and Taxes has been, I think it's still Green-Eyed Maverick, that's your signature deck, but Death and Taxes, you've played that for years.
Maverick and after this Death and Taxes were by far the decks which gave me the most fun. And I even can't tell whether it was Maverick, but yeah, it was Maverick. And I even now have my Death and Taxes ready in my suitcase, but it would be probably the last deck that I would take to a big Legacy tournament.
So how come? Do you feel, even if the crazy strong cards come off of the sideboard, that it's too much? Or do you expect the metagame to be that hostile to even see a lot of Plague Engineers main deck?
All together. Marc formerly said, really right, he likes the interaction that Death and Taxes offers. But let's say it this way. Often the interaction is quite bad at the moment. You have interaction, but it's not enough. You play your deck at an optimum, but just don't have a chance against opponent nut draws. And with this, I don't mean these turn 1 kill decks. Even you told me you are going to play Oops All Spells or Belcher. You don't stand a chance against Oops All Spells or Belcher. If you want to win there, you have to play stuff like Mindbreak traps in the board. But as Bahra mentioned, we have the Plague Engineer and Renin 6. He said Renin 6 is in greedy piles. Yeah, that's true. These decks are at the moment greedy. But even if they are a bit less greedy and the greediness of players goes back, then you face good, solid control decks with 3 or even 4 Renin 6. And honestly, I don't want to play Death and Taxes against a deck we just looked at, like this Obelisk Spider control deck. I think it's a terrible matchup. Not Chalice, not Trinisphere. These cards are not really disturbing. But 4 Renin 6 and these Plague Engineers in the board combined with the good stuff, because Death and Taxes naturally has lots of bad top decks. Lots. You play 3 Caracas, 4 Aether Vials, 4 Talias. I can't count the times where I had 2 Thalias in my hand. Okay, if one dies, I had another, and then draw a third. Or the Aether Vial in turn 6, and it does nothing. Or you have 1 Caracas and the Flicker Wisp in hand, and perhaps a Wasteland and Richard and Port, and you wait for the planes to cast it, and then you draw the second Caracas. And
But those are issues that have existed with Death and Taxes since the beginning of time,
yep,
right? That's not something
that's correct.
that came up
That's
recently.
correct. Plus, nowadays, you have these cards which are really bad for the deck.
So basically you're saying Death and Taxes has been playable for a long time, but never really far enough crazy good. And now it's being pushed back a little bit, or not only a little bit, significantly, which really puts it, like as you put it, into a state where it's the last deck you would play.
Well, let's say it this way. You had these times with Deathrite Shamans, and you could play Death and Taxes in these times for this 4-color control decks like Tomasz Mar played were really, really hard to encounter. Then there was a time when they banned Deathrite Shaman, and there I felt Death and Taxes was an okay choice, but still not that great. It was always okay. But now, I just don't see this deck in the format. To be honest, Maverick has the same problems as Death and Taxes at the moment. Ren and 6 and Plague Engineer are horrible for Maverick. But at least you have there the chance with Choke to have a good option against blue decks like Grixis Control or 4-color Control. If they don't have the Decay right away, you just win. And I really looked many matches of Death and Taxes online. For example, Karl-Heinz Kodausi, great Grixis Control player, and he crushed Death and Taxes online every single time. And even you made some years ago, that was a blasphemy that Death and Taxes lost against 4-color control decks. Because the mana denial plan against Deathrite did just not work. You summed up a tournament in Frankfurt, I guess, where you made a meta-analysis in Deathrite times.
Oh yeah, that was 2017.
Yeah, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, I collected all deck lists and actually had the Hatfield brothers from the US calculate the win percentage for every deck in the field, like for all the couple thousand matches that were played that weekend.
Exactly. And the best deck, the best performing deck was, I guess, this 4-color
Barnes Stoneblade.
Barnes Stoneblade. This deck I loved. I never had much time to play it, but I loved the deck. And Death and Taxes was one of the most played decks in the whole tournament, and the worst performing of all decks. And that's my impression. That is just at the moment the same in Legacy. Bahra is a great player. He knows every single trick in Death and Taxes, I guess, and that makes much. You can always win a tournament with an inferior deck because you play it at an optimum.
I mean, I've been doing it for years, right?
Maybe. But Death and Taxes is just a deck that is mass played by players because it's quite cheap. You have not to invest a whole car, for example, to build this deck, and you can just grab it up. Perhaps a friend of you has it and run it at a tournament. And with so many players playing this deck, it's naturally that there always are some top 8 deck lists of the deck.
So you're saying somebody's floating to the top when there's just enough people playing it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Mark, is this without a doubt the deck that you would go to? Or for example, I think we are not gonna see you at MKM Frankfurt, but assuming you would go, is that the deck you would play without a doubt if you had access to pretty much everything? Or would you certainly reconsider and try to, for example, hedge against these 4-color control decks by, I don't even know, playing something that's really good against them? I could imagine, for example, what's it called? Palace Jailer being really good against them, but you probably know better. How do you feel?
I would bring Death and Taxes to any tournament right now that I was going in with the sole purpose of trying to win. And if I'm hedging against Ren and 6 decks, I'm just playing cards like Brimmer's or Hallowed Spirit Keeper, and I'm on those cards right now, so that's what I'm trying to do.
So I'm actually looking up, you're actually playing 2 Brimas, King of Oreskos, in the list that you recently top 8'd the challenge with.
This I liked very much, by the way. I love Primas. It's such a great card. On the opposite, Hallowed Spirit Keeper, I'm not a fan of it and not convinced, because if I would play Death and Taxes, if I had to play Death and Taxes, I would for sure go with at least 3 Rest in Peace at the moment, because this handles the mana recovery of Ren and 6 and handles Red Hot Arcanist, and is great against Grixis control.
Yeah. Marc, I see another card in your sideboard that could be interesting. You're playing 3 Cataclysms right now. Is that something you would bring in against those decks?
I actually don't. I mean, that list is pretty old now, actually. It's like 2 weeks old or something. My sideboard looks very different now, and also my main deck looks a bit different. I don't think Cataclysm is as good versus Ren 6 decks as people tend to
want it to be.
Yeah. So against Grixis control deck, the problem is that they discard your hand so much. They go for so much hand disruption that once you can cast Cataclysm, it's either if you got flooded or if you top deck it very late. It has some criteria where it's good, and they of course need to not have the counterspell as well, but I would much rather play something proactive, something that straight up kills my opponent, like Hallowed Spirit Keeper, and is significantly cheaper, in of course 1 mana cheaper, but also you can put in with Vial, which makes a lot of difference. I think Cataclysm it's great in a Tundra meta, but I'm not really too happy playing it against Volcanic Island decks. So I'm down to 1 copy right now, because it also kills a lot of random decks like Enchantress and Nick Fit, and like some artifact prison decks it can kill as well.
Marius, you said you're actually. Can we tell which deck you will be playing in Frankfurt next month?
Yeah, there are 2 options. Maybe I'll really go with Maverick, because I just like the deck very much and it has a great toolbox. Or I'm going to play Painter with 4 Khans and quite immune to Ren and 6 or Plague Engineer, and has very good cards gotten as well in the last expansion.
But you would sure still be rooting for Marc to do well with Death and Taxes, a deck you feel very attached to.
I would, of course, root for him if he does well. I cannot see going Death and Taxes well in Frankfurt, but yeah, if someone does it, why not? What I am curious about when I look at recent Death and Taxes list, why there are always 2 Chalice in the board. They look like the opposite of this 4-color Loam deck, which has 4 Chalice of the Void in main deck and then 3 or 2 Swords to Plowshares in the sideboard, and just have this awful anti-synergy.
The thing about the Chalice is they are much more versatile than you might think. For example, you can bring in Chalice versus all the fast Storm decks right now. They play a lot of 0 converted mana cost cards. So you have a great turn 1 play that really restricts their mana usually. And also Bomberman is actually a pretty powerful deck now. So you have the Chalice on 0 versus them. Then you have the Chalice on 1 for value versus Delver. And the plan was always to try to outvalue Delver.
Delver is the only deck in the whole format, no matter which Delver deck you take, where I think Death and Taxes has a really decent matchup. And I don't think whether you need more sideboard cards here. Because, which I tested when I tested Death and Taxes, and which felt really great, were in these 2 slots of Chalice of the Void, 2 Grafdigger's Cage. You can play these turn 1-2. You have awesome cards against elves. You have 2 more cards against Storm Combo 2, because it shuts down Past in Flames. Or this new flashback Time Twister card, I don't know the name. And it's quite versatile, I think, because Chalice on 0 is of course an option, and I give you Bomberman, that's right. Their Chalice of 0 is really great.
Do you give me Tess? Tess has had a resurgence because Brian Cook won the Legacy Challenge.
Yeah, I give you Tess, but I think that's one of these dice roll matchups, I think.
Chalice makes it way better though.
And if you want to play really something against fast combo deck, I would probably go for these Mindbreak Traps.
I registered Mindbreak Trap at the last Legacy Challenge.
Ah, okay. There we go.
That's something I've been, that's something I've been telling Marius forever. I always told him, man, you just play those Mindbreak Traps. You have all these amazing 2-drops that are really hard for them to deal with, especially Thalia, which makes it even harder. Just build yourself a way to get to turn 2. So I'm really happy if you guys tell me that you're actually playing the Mindbreak Trap, because like you, I really like Death and Taxes. And I wanted to survive at least until turn 2 and then do its Death and Taxes thing.
Yes, the problem just is that you usually want, especially in Death and Taxes, you want your sideboard cards to be effective in a lot of matchups. And Mindbreak Trap is only good versus Storm combo.
You can actually use it. It's kind of crazy. I've done that before and actually won me the game against Bomberman. It sounds weird, but it works actually.
Yeah, and nowadays you don't only have Storm, let's say against Arndt and Tess, you have this Time Walk deck, you have Belcher, you have Oops Allspells, and even against Black Red Reanimate, I think Mind Break tracks are a decent card, because you probably only lose to a fast Griselbrand, and this you can neutralize turn 1 with a Mind Break trap.
In the end, Marc played them, right? So that's probably something to it.
Yeah, okay. Yes, great. And only one Canonist, that's blasphemy. Always play 4 Canonist.
You know, Marius is a follower of the Holy Church of Either One Canonist. And whenever he sees people playing fewer than 4, then he's like trying to convert you.
3 are okay if you play Mind Break Traps or Chalice, but 1 Canonist always seems really.
So we received some questions from our Discord that you can become a member of if you join our Patreon on patreon.com/everydayjournal. I'm gonna order them in a different order than we initially received them. So our first question from the Discord is: what is the right number of Palace Jailers in the 75? Do you board it out versus True Name Nemesis decks?
I think the right number of Palace Jailer is 1 or 0. I'm considering cutting it recently, but it's just very good in Mirrors, and it's also good versus Maverick and Miracles, but I'm really close to cutting mine. And yes, I bought them out versus all decks that play True Name Nemesis or play a faster board than mine. For example, all Delver decks, even though they don't play True Name, I would still bought out Palace Jailer in that matchup.
Curious, would you side it out against Elves?
Yes, definitely side it out versus Elves.
Yeah, I feel the same, but I've seen many people keep it in, and then you steal the emblem, and that never works out for them.
Never.
Yeah, Marius, how do you feel about Palace Jailer?
I think Bahra is completely right here. Palace Jailer has become a bit worse, for example, against Miracles, because many Death and Taxes players just say to me, yeah, Palace Jailer, I play it turn 4, I don't even exile something with it, but I just draw the cards. But since the Miracles players got this Narset, and Grixis plays Narsets too, you don't get anything from the Monarch. Probably I would always play 1 creature exile card in the main. Maybe Palace Jailer or maybe Banisher Priest. Because I think you want to be able to search a removal with Recruiter of the Guard. Banisher Priest might be great even with Mother of Runes. But getting rid of an Emrakul or Griselbrand, if you don't have the Caracas, it's too durable, just too important not to have it. Not to mention this Dark Depths token. Thor, you can of course flicker it out. But these lists who play 2 Palace Jailer or even more in sideboards do not look right to me at the moment.
So it occupies the slot of a Silver Bullet that you will dig up just in case. But for basically your mid-range value or a way to put pressure on the opponent in a strategic way, you would use other cards. For example, like Marc is using Hallowed Spirit Keeper, which also is a way to put like strategic pressure on the opponent, because it's a card that eventually will maybe, well, I almost want to say take over the game depending on the matchup, because it can also be used to put a lot of pressure on Planeswalkers, because it produces flying tokens, right? Hallowed Spirit Keeper?
Yes.
Yeah, it produces flying. Yeah, and of course it's gettable via Recruiter of the Guard. This is, for example, the reason why I hate Palace Jailer in Maverick. I really saw many lists who played it as a one-off in the main deck, but a Palace Jailer which you draw random and can't tutor for sounds not great to me.
2 other questions that we received. They are directed towards different ways of playing Death and Taxes. For example, here's the first one. If the meta shifts away from Death and Taxes, does Thalia Stompy become more viable? What are the pros and cons of Thalia Stompy compared to Death and Taxes? And we assume Scott is referring to the Marc, how do you call it? Is it Clerics? No, it's actually Eldrazi in Texas, right? That's
Soldier Stompy?
No, it's probably Eldrazi in Texas, I would think.
With Displacer and stuff like this.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, the deck it has more early cards. As Marc said previous, having 4 Chalice of the Void and 4 Ancient Tombs, and I don't know whether they play Mox Diamonds or Chrome Mox. Depends on the color of the creatures, I guess. You are never deck that has not a chance to win the tournament. Let's say it this way. The deck is less consistent than Death and Taxes, but you have more outs against combo, for example. These decks which play 4 copy of Thalias plus 4 Chalice of the Void plus stuff in the sideboard, perhaps, or might even not, are really great against fast combo. but of course worse against stuff like Grixis Control.
Yeah, I think where Thalia, I mean, Eldrazi Texas, where it's better is that it has a better nut draw, and it's better versus combo, yeah. But the thing that Texas has is better against counter spells, and it has a better grind plan, and then, of course, it's much more consistent. So it's a big if the meta shifts away from Death and Texas. I don't think it really did. Unless people start main decking 3 Plague Engineers, I don't really see the meta shifting away from Death and Texas in particular.
You know what Marc Vogt is working on? He's working on the bane of every kind of Magic that we like. He's playing a Grixis Control list that plays 2 main deck Staticaster and 2 main deck Plague Engineer. I pray that I will never get paired against that deck.
But why Staticaster in main? It's so bad.
Because he has so much value. Like, he doesn't want to post this list yet, which I respect. But he's not playing a traditional Grixis Control list. He's got much more value, like really big endgame value. So he told me he's really just looking for a way to get to the endgame, and all those swarmy creature decks, that they are causing a lot of problems for him.
I don't think you can get so much endgame with cards like Staticaster, which are dead in certain matchups. It does not even ping Planeswalker. Marc is the other Marc Vogt is a great player, no doubt about it. And Plague Engineer in main sounds really reasonable. Even if he does not kill anything, it's still 3 mana 2/2 Death Touch, which is okay against nearly every non-flying creature. But Staticaster in mains.
I'm just bringing this up because we were talking about whether there's a push away from Death and Texas or not. And I think people will always keep playing the deck, like we mentioned earlier, just because, first of all, it's super cheap compared to the rest of Legacy. Maybe not super cheap, but it doesn't have any reserved list cards as far as I remember. And it's just so much fun. So I think saying that the meta shifts away from Death and Texas, I don't see that happening until people, like Marc mentioned, really start hating on the main deck a lot.
You can make it expensive by adding some fetch lands or duels to it to splash a color.
Yeah, that's actually the third question that we were getting at, which is there ever a correct time to splash in Death and Texas? Whether it be green for Hate Bears, red for Marius of the Moon and Sudden Demise, or black for Dark Confident and Plague Engineer. And I know that both of you have experimented and also done well with splashes. I think, Marc, you pioneered the red splash in Imperial Texas, and Marius played a lot of green and black splashes in Death and Texas. So how do you feel about doing that in general as well as right now? So maybe we'll start with Marius and his experience splashing green and black.
Yeah, first of all, it's funny that no one mentions the blue splash, because you can splash blue for stuff like Geist of St. Truft or Meddling Mages, who are humans too with Karens, but I don't think there were many lists who had decent success with it. I saw Death and Texas with 4 Nemesis in main. Yeah, double blue, but...
Geist of St. Truft is not a human.
No. Lavinia and Meddling Mage are human. Geist of St. Truft just because it's only one blue. But I saw lists who played 3 to 4 True Name Nemesis just to vial in and have some unblockable dudes with equipment.
That sounds pretty desperate.
Yeah. But I think the list even won something.
How do you feel about the more common splashes?
Okay, first of all, the green splash. The green splash offers you in main deck stuff like Gadoktik, Knight of the Reliquary, perhaps this new Knight of Autumn, which can be really awesome if you flicker it in and out. But apart from this, in main deck you do not get so much from the green splash, especially if you think that you really get a much worse mana base with it. The main reason for a green splash is choke in the sideboard. Perhaps a Sylvan Library, but primary choke. Choke together with Rishadan Port, which can stone rain the enemy islands, can really be a blowout for the opponent. Then for the other splash, for the black splash, of course, we had earlier the Odds of Pontiff in the main or in the sideboard to search for, to get rid of True Name or Goblin tokens or Elves, for example. Nowadays you get Plague Engineer, and this might be, in my opinion, the best option for Death and Texas at the moment. You can play 1 in the main and perhaps 1 or 2 more in the sideboard, and can be really ahead in the mirror, since the Plague Engineer is only one-sided. This I don't understand. I don't understand why the Plague Engineer has to be one-sided, to be honest.
It's supposed to be good, so I don't know.
Yeah. In German, we always say it has the Kindersicherung.
So, is that something you would consider doing? Splashing Black in Death and Taxes right now and making it work that way? Or is it asking too much from the deck?
I would probably play Maverick with 2 Plague Engineers in the sideboard, so
you would actually splash both. You would splash green and red and call it Maverick.
Yes. Not Aether Vials. Meanwhile, I hate Aether Vials, to be honest, because if you don't have them in starting, we talked about this earlier. But in Maverick, I would probably either go with 2 Mindbreak traps in the board, or do a little Black Splash for Plague Engineers in the sideboard.
Okay. And Marc, how do you feel about the splashes? Both the red splash that you've played for quite a while, as well as the current other options?
Well, since the printing of Recruiter of the God, I don't think a splash is worth it. I think the closest one is black, but what turned out to be the most powerful thing about the red splash was the Imperial Recruiter that gave you a really powerful late game and of course a tutor effect. But Recruiter of the God is way superior since it fetches Flicker Wisp and it lets you stay in one color, which is a big plus as well. So I don't think the trade-off in power level versus consistency is worth it for a splash right now, or I don't see it being a thing in the foreseeable future.
Okay, and how about the what Marius mentioned, splashing black, which he seems to quite like?
Yeah, I think that's the closest thing you can get, but I still don't think it's worth it.
Okay. So with that, we're gonna close our segment about Death and Taxes. A deck I really hope will at least put a copy into the top 8 of MKM Frankfurt, just because I want to continue this discussion, like the channel community discussion, because people always mention how, oh my god, Death and Taxes, now it's not playable anymore, now there's this new hate, and then the deck still somehow keeps performing, and whether it's because of the numbers or because the deck actually is still in a much better position than a lot of people think, I'm just happy that we have a mono-white creature deck in one of the most powerful formats ever created, and that's just something that really speaks to me. That's something, like, people have been trying to do that in Modern, and Modern every other week it's broken for another reason, and it's kind of hard to make stuff like, I don't even know, Blade Splicer work. But in Legacy, we get to leverage that kind of incremental creature value, and that's just like a playstyle that I mentioned. It's really, really cool. With closing out, I would like to hear your opinions. We talked about that. Which decks you think, just like a short round, which decks are in a good position in the metagame right now? Which kind of decks would you like to play right now, Marius?
Which deck I would like to play, or which decks might be the best?
Which decks you think are very well positioned?
Hard to say, Julian. Hard to say. I think,
or decks you want to play as well.
I'm not anymore able to play every deck I want, because I sold many of my duels to build a house, to buy a house. Yeah,
that tells you something about Legacy.
Yeah, exactly. It was infinite value. I think really a 3 or 4 colored Ren and 6 deck might be really well positioned, for I think that the most optimized list is not yet found. And if you just want to win Legacy, just play Sneak Show. Oh
yeah, that's actually a deck we haven't really talked about or I don't even see talked about a lot recently. I think Bob used it to top 4 the Legacy playoffs recently, and I asked him why he played it, and he was just
ignore Ren and 6.
It's Sneak Show. It's
ignore
fine.
Ren and 6. Ignore Plague Engineer. Just play Sneak Show, 2 Omniscience main, ready to go.
Marc, which kind of decks do you like, other than Death and Taxes, of course?
Well, yeah, that's my number 1, and then Blue Red Delver and Maverick. That's not decks I would like to play, at least not Blue Red Delver, but I think they are very well positioned.
Okay. And for me, I really think the Canadian has made not only a temporary but actual comeback, which maybe that's just my wish for Canadian to be a really good deck in Legacy, speaking out of me, but I think it's actually a decent position. I also like Maverick, especially the list that Stefan Schütz, Mental Misstep, recently won the Legacy playoffs with, Splashing Black. And that probably means quite a bit coming out of me, because I've always hated the Black Splash, but Splashing Black for Plague Engineer, that card just solves so many issues that Maverick used to have, and yeah, that's something I like. And for now, at least, I also like Oops All Spells, but I don't foresee that deck being good in the long run. But for now, it's a deck that has produced quite a bit of value for me on Magic Online recently. So yeah, that's something I could see going forward. One more thing before we close out the podcast tonight that I want to mention is not everybody is aware that there have been a couple of updates to the DCI policy with regards to how issues that arise during the tournaments are handled. And I want to use this opportunity to just make this more well-known inside the community. So there's basically a couple of changes, but the 3 relevant changes for us are, first of all, with regards to Narset and Leovold. You should really make sure to reach out and stop your opponent from drawing extra cards that they are not supposed to draw. In the past, that was considered a hidden card error, which carried much harsher penalties. For example, if it was considered that the opponent didn't do it on purpose, but still accidentally drew the extra card, you got to actually look at their hand and basically Thoughtseize them. You could take away any of the cards because that's the only fix they really had available at that point. Now, they tried to turn that into something else because they felt that created an incentive for the Narset or Leovold player to not remind their opponent about playing the game correctly. So now the way it's handled, it's just a game rule violation, which will still carry a warning, and actually a warning for both players if you totally fail to remind your opponent. If you try to stop them, but they still accidentally draw or just rush the game, then it's only a warning for them. And depending on how far the game has progressed at that point, they will have different fixes. And the worst case scenario, when you actually only catch that later, is that they actually get to keep those cards. For example, they play a brainstorm pre-combat, move into combat, there's like interactions in combat going on with like cards played from hand, and you only realize after combat, then they actually get to keep those cards. And if you realize it early on, then they are going to remove 2 random cards. Well, if it's a brainstorm, right? Actually, 3 random cards, I would guess, since it's a brainstorm in the main phase, from their hand, which still leaves them better off than with the previous fix. So it's very, very much in your interest to remind your opponent to not draw extra cards for Narset or Leovold. Unless, I guess, if you're out to get the warnings. But like, if your opponent just gets a single warning, that doesn't really get you anything. And I'd much rather like not have them basically it would create some kind of looting effect almost for them, and I don't want them to have that option available to randomly increase their card quality. So definitely try to make sure your opponent is not drawing extra cards. One more thing is something that people have been doing for quite a while already, but now it's also be put into the rules. If you're doing a combo turn where you're floating mana over a significant amount of time, so not just like for a couple seconds, but actually during like a storm turn, or if you're elves and you're going off, you're now, by the rules, by the tournament guidelines, required to track that mana visually. And there's some discussion of whether like dice are enough or you actually have to write it down, because, for example, with your life total, I know that Marius still famously doesn't write his life total down, but a lot of people do that, and they are supposed to do that on competitive rules enforcement level. And there's some discussion on whether you also need to do that with mana, so basically dice wouldn't even be enough for that. But general for now, just keep in mind that just counting it out audibly, that isn't enough. You actually have to visually represent it. And the third thing is, that's actually the most interesting fix to me, because it rarely ever comes up, but it's actually an interesting situation. Imagine you forgot to de-sideboard in the previous round, and now you come back and you play the game, and after like a couple of turns, you draw a sideboard card, and you realize, oh fuck. In the past, that was usually a game loss for you. Now the way it's going to be handled, you call a judge, they determine, okay, how many of your sideboard cards are in your main deck, which shouldn't be there, and how many of your main deck cards are in your sideboard. For example, the easiest example is you have 4 Pyroblast in the main that should be in the sideboard, and you have 4 Swords to Plowshares in the sideboard that should be in the main. At the moment that is discovered, you take those 8 cards, you set them aside, and then your opponent gets to decide how they are distributed for the rest of the game. Your opponent can make you keep all 4 Pyroblasts, your opponent can exchange like 2 Pyroblasts for 2 swords, or he can bring in the swords entirely. And the card that you just drew where you realize that's also the one that's going to be replaced.
That's funny.
It's really funny.
Better than a game loss.
Exactly, right?
But it wasn't a game loss before, was it?
It was. Quite sure.
I'm pretty sure.
If you call a judge on yourself when you forgot to de-sideboard. That's what I did at GP Paris in like 2013. And I got to sideboard, de-sideboard, and then I got to take a mulligan. That's the only...
But what you are saying is when you discover it in the opening hand, then you can fix that. Then that's why when you're supposed to call a judge on yourself, and it's not going to be that big of an issue. But if it's discovered inside the game, previously they didn't have a way to actually repair that, so they could only issue a game loss, and now they got this new way of fixing the error, which I think makes it easier for people to call a judge on themselves, because I think it's a common thing in not only Legacy but Magic in general that people are like, oh, I'm just going to hide that. I'm going to pretend, well, I'm going to finish the game without this. And that's actually a reason for grounds for disqualification, if you notice that. So we at least made it easier for people to call a judge on themselves. And overall, I think it's a good change. It will probably not be very relevant most of the time, but when it is, it could be interesting. I want to see it in action.
Yeah, me too.
So, guys, where can people find you on social media, on the internet, in real life? You don't need to give me your new addresses.
Yeah, in school in Munich. No. On Facebook, just search for Marius Hausmann.
No Twitter, no Twitch?
No, sorry.
Okay. Marc, where can people find you online?
On Twitch, I am under the handle Bahra_. And on Twitter, I am Bahra01.
Awesome. And if you want to hit me up, it's Julian23 on Twitter. On Twitch, I'm just It's Julian. You can also check out itsjulian.com. Maybe that's also where you found this podcast. And yeah, that's going to be it for today. I want to provide some shout outs for Sean, Matt, and Baju. Some of them are actually our new Patreons on the Delver and Eternal Witness tier. And of course, also shout outs to Scott and Kurish, who are supporting us on the Grizzlebrand tier, our highest of tiers. And not only you, but all the people on Patreon are really doing a big thing and contributing to making the show work and allowing us to produce the show. So thank you so much for that. And with that, have a great morning, evening, afternoon, night, wherever you are, and see you next time. Bye-bye.